Hi and welcome to Poor Pete's. I'm Pete. Today I'd like to discuss with you selecting bow wood. In order to make this easy for the both of us, I'm going to discuss what it takes for a tree to grow. And I'm a simple-minded man. In my simple understanding, I'd like to discuss with you how that tree grows to better look at how to select bow wood. So, to begin, most of the tree is dead. Even though it's alive, you have leaves on it, you have fruit on it, you have all this life, but the majority of the tree is dead. The wood inside the tree is dead. It's still working and being used for structural support and also for channels like a wick to bring up water or to store. And the two types of wood that are found inside of a tree are the heartwood, that's the dark wood, that's going to be storing stuff, and the sapwood, that's the light colored wood, and it's going to be the wick bringing up water. Another thing you might see on a tree that's also dead is the bark. The bark's there for protection, whether it's from animals that want to eat on that tree and not damage the life in the cambium layer right below it that's actually creating new rings each and every year, or from fire or other types of mishaps, bugs, insects, boring critters and everything like that. So I can show this to you with this log, and if you look inside of it, you're going to see the white area right here, very light. This has glue on the bottom of it, but this is very light right here. That's a sapwood. This is a heartwood. It's very dark. Then you got your bark, and then you have a thin cambium layer, and that's what provides the new ring growth. Now, first thing I want to point out is the bark. The bark is very important to look at when woodworking and cutting green timber down. You can see that the majority of that's straight, but right inside this area you start seeing some of that bark kind of getting twisty, going around that knot. So I'd like to tell you that when you look at the bark on a tree, you can tell how that grain's actually running through the tree. It parallels with that bark. And things you want to watch out for is the worst one, I think, and like I said, I'm no professional. I'm just an average individual doing this on my own. And the thing you want to watch out for is that tree actually twisting. And it can twist just like that. It just looks like when you split it with a splitting maul, a log, you can actually see it just like a hand just twisting right up through that thing. And that's something you don't want to see. Some woodworkers, especially bow makers, like it when certain types of wood actually zigzag back and forth, and they can make a snaky bow out of it. And pretty cool. Shows off some of their craftsmanship and ability to conquer and overcome. So on that sapwood, some sapwoods are extremely thin on different species of trees. Here's a piece of yew, and you can see that sapwood is very small, while the heartwood is very large. And each type of species of tree is going to be vastly different. But what I do want to talk about is as that tree grows right underneath the bark, there's that cambium layer. It grows. Well, in early spring, when everything begins to thaw out, we get our rains and everything like that, that tree begins to grow. The nutrients from the ground's there. It's been waiting all winter, and it starts growing, and it starts shooting out its shoots and leafing out with its flowers and its fruit or its seeds or whatever that tree does. All that huge inrush is going to create a different type of wood than after the tree is established that year. So that huge inrush is going to create this huge porous type of long tube, grainy tubes that can bring up that life into that tree, and that makes a very bad wood for bow makers. Now, the later growth, once that tree hits that point and it says, I am going this year, I just need to keep on having sun and water and everything's going good. It switches over and it creates a denser type of wood. This denser type of wood is great for supporting the tree. And you can actually grade your wood on how much early growth and how much later growth it has. So when you look at a ring, I'll show this to you. Here's a piece of oak. When you look at this, you can see the rings, and you can see, especially down here at the bottom, you can definitely see that some of these rings are very large, and you can see that little white area right there, and you can also see my finger. I smashed it pretty bad the other day. Anyways, you see that thin white line right there? That's that early wood. Well, then once it switches and that tree's established for that year, it switches over to this later wood. And that's what bow makers want. Now, if you start getting on a lot of these hardwoods, especially with Osage, and the videos I'm going to be making have me working with Osage. There's many other types of wood, and there's a lot of different types of wood, especially like firs that might be the complete opposite in what a piece of Osage looks like as far as the early and later growth. And but as far as Osage and a lot of these hardwoods, you want to see a larger later growth than you do of the early growth. If you have more early growth than you do later growth, there's no use in you taking that piece of wood and putting your blood and your sweat and your time into it to try and turn it into something that's really going to fail. And how a bow works is basically a piece of stick, and it bends, right? And this energy is stored in that wood until we let go of the string, and it's propelled as those limbs are freed, correct? Now, when I say the back of the bow, that would be the part that faces away from me, faces towards what I'm shooting. When I say the belly of the bow, that's the part that faces me, belly to belly. And the back of the bow should, with doing self bows or doing solid wood bows, very traditional type of bows, the back of the bow should be the outside of the tree. And it doesn't have to be exactly the outside of the tree. It could be more inside, but it is the outside of that bark. This is the bark side. So when I do this, the top would have been where the bark would have been somewhere. And the bottom is basically where the inside of the core of the tree would be. Okay? So very simple. So when I bend this, what's happening right here is this back of the bow, the top of this, is undergoing tension. So as I bend this, those fibers are being stretched and they're tensioning. So the way that tension is going to fail is one of these fibers is going to lift up, and it does not take a whole lot. If you had a microscope and watched exactly where it breaks, I bet it is such a small piece that actually starts lifting. And once it starts lifting, it all just starts going on some of the woods I'm familiar with. So you can look at that. That's tension on the back. If you look at the bottom, it's actually going through something completely different. It's going through the opposite. It's actually getting compressed. So the bottom of that wood is under compression. So you have both tension on the top and compression on the bottom. So the way that the bottom fails is that it compresses that wood so hard that that wood deforms and begins to fail and can have a catastrophic failure. It'll begin to break, and it'll break the whole bow. But on the tension side, it'll begin as something very little, and it'll just rip down and rip out. You could probably imagine how that happens. So like this bow right here, I was very happy with this bow. It's a great bow. I ended up backing it with a snake skin I actually killed. And in this part right here, which you can see that bow. So it's got this twist right here, which is pretty cool, but also lifts up. Well, these rings are extremely thin rings. I mean, they are thin, very thin. And I started shooting this bow quite a bit, and I started looking at this, and I was like, what is that? And right here on the edge, right there where that little kink in there is, I started seeing a crack, and it started lifting up a little bit. So instead of just letting that bow actually just come apart, I could have did a couple different things. I could have wrapped it with string, glued it. All you have to do is just keep that grain down if possible. So what I did was I backed it with some snake skin. I'm not done with it yet, and I'll eventually, this is a 50-pound bow, I'm gonna take this down just a little bit so it has less tension on the outside, if that makes sense. But that's a demonstration of something that you can work on for a long time, and it's not amounting to what you thought it was going to amount to. Okay, let's look at another thing. So if you're looking at compression, I'll show you compression failure. Now, if you look, let's see if I can get that. Do you see those lines right inside there? They're going to be right here, right here, right there, right there, right there. They actually go both ways. And if I could put that under magnifying glass, you'd really see a lot more. But hopefully you might have just caught a little gist of what I was trying to explain. And what that is it's crystalline. It's crystalline all up. And that compression, that bow is actually red elm. And I hardened it with heat on the belly of the bow to actually make that wood a little bit more tempered and harder. And for a little bit of it right there, and that's on me. That's my tillering. And actually, that's the first bow I ever made. But it started compressing, and all those crystals start going together and making those lines, and that's an indication that that bow is getting damaged right there in the compression of those fibers and is getting ready to fail. Now, if that ever happens to you, you want to watch it. And if you're watching it and it does it right away, what I did is I started tillering off. I started removing wood from different areas to try and relieve that spot right there. And I was able to get it to where it wasn't doing that anymore. And the bow's completely shootable. I enjoy shooting it. It's one of my favorite bows to shoot. But that is another thing that can happen with compression. Okay, so with tension and compression and looking at bow woods, I want to talk a little bit about bow design. So I want to start off with a flat bow. So this is a flat bow that I made last year. It's limb width is 1/7/8. It's string from knock, which is where you attach the string to the other end on the tips. Knock to knock is 52 inches. It pulls 50 pounds at 28 inches. It is very short. It's very fast. It's very fun to shoot. But being at 50 pounds, it's not fun to shoot it all day. But it's a good bow to go out there and maneuver around with, and you could sit down, kneel, or go out through the woods and be able to hunt with this type of bow, and it's convenient to carry. Okay, but anyways, this bow is what we call a flat bow. So the reason why we call it flat, it has a recurve right here, but it is very flat. Osage orange is really good at this type of bow. Osage has very good compression. So compression being on the belly of the bow, it's able to compress and just be very strong and dense. And any of you farmers out there, Anybody who's been in the Midwest or knows anything about that Osage orange or hedge, many people call it many different things, but you could put that stuff in the ground for a corner or fence post and it's going to last over 100 years. I have some at the place that I live at that are over 100 years old and they're still there. But that's how dense and strong this wood is. And in that type of compression, it does very well. Now, its weakness, on the other hand, is its tension, which is on the top, the back of the bow, the tension. So the way to make tension, to kind of diffuse that tension, is actually to make the limb wider. And it doesn't need to be this wide. This is an extremely wide bow. And I want to make it that way, but it does not need to be that wide. But you can actually widen the back of the bow, and it'll give it more of that wood that's going to be under tension to prevent it from failing. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, here's an English longbow. So this is 71 inches from nock to nock. It pulls 40 pounds. It shoots very well. Is my first bow. I was very proud of it. Has nice horn nocks that I put on there, and I really enjoy this bow. But this is what you call a D-shaped bow, and the reason why it's called a D-shaped bow is if you were to cut this and make a cross section of it, the back of the bow would be flat while the belly of the bow would be rounded. And the reason why simply is because yew, which is a very good wood for making D-shaped bows out of, and English longbows, and the famous, you know, it's an iconic bow. Yew's really good at it. But yew on the back side of the bow has amazing amounts of tension. It can just take that tension, and it's great. It is a great wood for tension, but it allows them to make it thinner. You don't have to make it thicker like you would many times with other types of wood. But its compression is just not as good as its tension. So that's on the belly of the bow. So the way to make that compression better is to add more wood. So the way that they found to add more wood was to make it rounded, making that D-shaped bow. So you might ask, where do I find bow wood? And I'd like to encourage you that if you want to get into bow making, you can. And there's wood all over, and people have it on their properties. And you don't need to harvest, you know, this big giant walnut tree that's, you know, worth a ton of money and veneer boards or anything like that. But you might be looking for an ash or a hickory or a branch off an osage. And that's another thing. You can just cut a branch, a large branch off of a tree to start making your own bow. So just asking people and asking around. You might even see inside your yard. You might have a large enough yard that you might have a certain type of tree that has a branch that you might have to cut down. And there might be a bow stave on there that you can use. Neighbors, different people, whenever you see people cutting down trees and their brush piles, ask if you can go through them. What is another thing? Oh, if you don't have a certain type of wood, you can actually order it online. Now, one thing with ordering online is a lot of people sell some very good wood online for bows. A lot of people sell very bad wood online for bows. And I don't mean that to sound very bad, because many people don't exactly know what good and bad wood looks like for bows. What looks like good wood for some people might be bad wood for other people. And in reading in the Bowyer Bible, which is a very good book to read, it comes in a 4-volume set, and it's very, very good. Can't say enough about it, really. But they say that Osage orange, that only 5% of wood is really acceptable and really perfect for making bows. In other woods, it's a lot higher than that. But that just goes to show you that just not any tree, just not any run-of-the-mill type of stuff is going to work for making a bow, you know, for many aspects of that. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about grading, since we talked about buying wood from online, this is a bow stave. Bow staves are wood that's prepared for making a bow. Okay, so if I was on an online site and I was looking at bow staves that I didn't have access to and I wanted to purchase one, the first thing that I want to look at is the twist. Now, there should be pictures available for you to look at. One thing I can say is eBay. I order stuff on eBay all the time, and I know for a fact that they sell bow staves on eBay. And if you look down the bow on their pictures, you can take this plane right here, that's nice and flat, and you can match it up with the other side. And you want to see that those two planes are nice and flat with each other, not like this. And if you see that twist inside there, especially as a beginner, stay away from it. And I'm not a professional, but I know some of my limitations, and they are many, but I will stay away from twist probably more than anything else. The next thing I want to check for is cracks. Bow makers actually call them checks. So you want to look at the end. You want to see if there's cracks in the end. You want to see how long they run. And then in the back of the bow, on the outside, if the bark is removed, you want to see if there's long lengthwise checks or cracks that run inside that. You want to be very careful, because if some of those cracks, even on the back side of the bow, some of those cracks can run very deep and really ruin a potentially great piece of wood. So that would be number 2. Number 3, I really want to check the rings. And you can tell on this piece of Osage. You can look at the rings for yourself, and you can see they're pretty decent rings. So this is an acceptable piece of wood. It's actually a large piece of wood. I'll be able to make 2 or 3 bows out of it. But I'd want to look at the rings. I'd want to make sure that you have plenty of later growth for that type of species that you're wanting, and that type of bow is going to be worth, what's paying an extra $30 if you get something that's really good to, I think I can get by, and you spend that $30 and it just makes a bow that is very thin. Let me say something else too. If you're looking to do Osage, and that type of wood wants one solid growth ring, that on its back it wants one solid growth ring. You can't cut into different growth rings and expect that bow to be able to last. Okay, so on this type of bow, you want a larger ring. You want a big ring distance. A lot of times they do it by inch, like a giant one would be like 3 rings per inch, an average one, I don't know what an average one would be, 10, 7, whatever, but you don't want to get in a fine area where it's like 15, 20 rings per inch, or something really so fine that you accidentally break through it and you have to start your whole entire bow all over, because what you do first is you start working the back down to just make sure you have one solid ring. So something to watch out for. The larger that ring size is, the easier it is for a beginner to be successful at it, if it's Osage. Okay, so next thing I want to look at, and I'm going in order of how I look at a bow stave, and this could be incorrect for many people, and I want to just mention something, that people make bows and they're professionals, and people make bows so many different types of ways, and people have their own niche and how to do it, what type of wood, where they get their wood from, what style and type of bow that they have. But I don't. This is just what works for me, and it might work for you, it might not. But eat the fish, spit out the bones. The next thing I look at is if it's reflexed or deflexed. So I want this bow stave, if at all possible, if this is the back, I want it to go like this, or to go straight up and down. The worst one is I do not want it to make a bow from this back. And that's because as you begin to tiller your bow, it's going to have a little bit of set that goes into it, furthering that progression. So if you have a straight piece, you can expect that if you don't do anything to it to bend it to a reflex or anything like that, as you begin to tiller the process and begin to shoot it, that your bow is no longer straight anymore, but slightly cupped, deflexed, which is fine. It is fine for many bows and they shoot well. Something to consider though. Another thing you want to consider, especially if you're a beginner, is a zigzag. If that bow zigzags back and forth, it's really cool. And some of these master bowyers out there that make these bows that look like a snake, they can put snake skin on them and have those things just wiggle, is just unbelievable. And but it leads a lot to the craftsmanship. You really have to know what you're doing, and the tillering can get really complicated. And in any of those types of bows, anytime that you have recurved tips, a snake in the bow, or anything that's added, it's really going to get complicated in the tillering process. And when I say tillering process, that means slowly taking off wood as you're bending that bow to get the correct shape, that there's no spot that's overbending or underbending to bring you to a finished bow. So stuff to stay away from, right? And what I look at last is knots, and that would be pin knots, because if I see a giant knot going through a bow, it's not going to work, you know. And take that with a grain of salt, because I actually love a knot hole in bows that you can actually look through, just like that one right there. You can see that hole in there. I think that's really cool. But what I'm talking about is a knot that you're unable to work the bow. And that's why I have that at the bottom of the list, because knots in a bow, knots in wood are going to happen. They work. I think the greater majority of all my bows have knots in them, and they might be little pin knots. But with the proper knowledge and execution, you can make a successful bow even with knots in it. All right, well, I hope we're understanding a lot of what I'm trying to get across to you guys. So, cutting your own bow. So, let's say someone gives you permission to cut some wood on their property, right? Let's say you don't have very much money. You can cut bow wood with a simple saw. This is just a simple saw from Home Depot, and it doesn't cost very much. It's cheap. It's really a disposable saw. Once it's no good anymore, you just really throw it away. I hate to say that, but yeah, a lot of these more modern saws. I like old saws that you can sharpen and everything like that, but a good cheap saw is really good for working. And the reason why I say that, don't use a really nice saw, because if that tree starts falling, bending, and everything like that, and it jacks up or bends your blade, rather do it with a cheap one, right? So you could do it with that. You can do it with an axe. If you have access to a chainsaw, you can do it with a chainsaw. It's really easy doing it with a chainsaw. So now you cut it down. Now what do? Well, if I'm going to do nothing else and I just cut down a log, okay, whether that is a branch on the wood or it's a small diameter tree, 8 to 10 inches is a really good size I like for making bows, and that would be multiple bows. If I'm going to do nothing else with it, then I will take Type Bond 3, because you can mix this stuff with water, and it does great. It still dries, so that tree has all that real wet, you know, in the pores of the wood. So I just take this on my hand and slap it on the cut parts, and you can use any type of wood glue, you know what I mean, as long as it's, you know, able to get wet and work really well. I have ran out and use hide glue. Do not use hide glue, because hide glue just loves moisture and will re-liquefy, and takes a long time to dry. So stay away from that. So I like the Type Bond. Works really good for me. And that will keep the ends from checking and cracks starting to run down them. Lord willing and hopefully. And I tell you what, some of those woods, especially like ash, when you cut ash, you can cut a giant log with a chainsaw. And as soon as you're done, that ash is already, on a nice hot day, it'll just start cracking wide open on the base. In the heartwood, it'll show you exactly where it's cracking, and there's just no way of stopping it sometimes. So anyways, another thing to consider is, let's say you got a log. It's on the ground. Do you split it or do you cut it? Well, some types of wood you like to split. So with this Osage, and we were talking about on the back, it having that tension and being real weak in the tension. What you want to find out is if this has a snake in it, or if it's nice and straight, or if it slowly has a twist in it. And the only way to figure that out is by splitting it, because this is a straight grain type of wood, and it does very good, and that split is going to let you know. Some guys split it on one side, and once they see that, then they can measure over on the other side and cut it with a bandsaw or a chainsaw or whatever, however they want to do it. Some types of wood don't really need to have that done to them. This is yew that I bought. I do not have yew by me. This is from Washington, and the guy cut it on bandsaw, and that works. Now, hickory. I've taken some hickory, and one really cool thing you can do with hickory is in the summertime when the tree's growing and it's starting off its early growth wood, you can actually, when you cut it, you can actually take a screwdriver or a chisel and pry up that bark. Once you get it, a lot of times, if it's the right time of year, you can get your hand underneath of it, and you can actually massage off and rip that bark right off the outside of that tree and let it dry like that. And when you do that, what I found is just glue the ends. You don't have to glue the log, but just leave the log and let that cure for, 2 years, and get its moisture content down. But what it looks like is all these like grain and Celtic knots weaving together, and it actually really is the grains. And in hickory, their grains are interlocked. So if you've ever split hickory and you're splitting it with a log splitter and it splits, you have these grains that are going across each other, and you're having to rip it apart at the very end. And if you start trying to split something like that to find out how the grain runs, it's just going to split all over the place. So you can actually just take that and cut that with a saw. And I do not recommend cutting it with a cheap Home Depot hand saw, the length of that. I recommend using a bandsaw or a chainsaw. But you can actually, if you had to, I guess you could force split it, but no good. But really cool wood to work with. And because of that, you really don't have to worry. Hickory's a really good wood to work with as a beginner, because you don't have to worry about the grain runoff and stuff that we'll be talking about later on in some other videos and everything. If you're interested in furthering yourself in bows, there'd be a couple places that I could recommend that you look, and one of them would be Mick Grewcock, and I'll put the link in the description down below. But Mick Grewcock is an English bowyer. He's not making videos right now, but they're still on YouTube. And the energy that man has is really exciting. And I really learned a lot from him. And that's one of the reasons why I did an English longbow first. I really was excited. I went into the backyard, cut down an ash sapling, and began making a bow that soon failed, and I was just addicted. And my wife said, "You spent all that time." And I said, "Well, I learned a lot, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to stay away from now." But Mick Grewcock is an excellent resource in your toolbox. There's also an American bow maker that makes Osage bows. His name is Clay Hayes, and I've only watched a couple videos from Clay Hayes, but he seems really good, has a book out, and gives a lot of tips and tricks out there on YouTube and the internet. An awesome resource to have, and I have it personally, is the 4-volume set, the Bowyer Bible. And it is full of all different articles, and it's a compilation of many different bowyers and many different facets, whether it's from Africa, it's from Europe, it's the long bow or an early European bow or a Viking bow, or whether it's Native American or South American. They have bows from all over, and different tips, techniques, designs, and talk about various types of bow making skills, tips and tricks. It'd be something that, if you like bow making, it'd be worthwhile for you to get. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to hear more videos like this, then leave me a message and subscribe.